emailed Renee last night, and you could hear her all over the ceiling. She was so excited.
We are still in Exodus chapter 20. And we're going to be looking at what is normally considered the fourth commandment. And we've read these, but we'll look back at verses 8, 9, and 10, and 11. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle, or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. What do we think about that?
They had to skip the whole day milking the cow. Poor cow.
Sherry went to the fair last Saturday, the state fair in Puyallup, and the Western Washington, the half-state fair, I guess it is. And she sent me some pictures, and when I take her, she kind of got over wanting me to take her to the fair, because as soon as I get there, I'm ready to leave. And I try to act patient for her, but she can tell it's a pretty thin veneer. And she sent me some pictures of some dogs and some cats and everything, and then she sent me some pictures of some really pretty cows they had there, showing them at the fair, all real brushed and udder shaved, and all that stuff, real pretty show cows. And she said they wouldn't even look at her. She was trying to talk to them, and they wouldn't even look at her. And they probably got other things on their mind, I guess. But there is, I think, we even seen the teachings of Christ, and an exception on some of the agricultural things, like you brought up, Connie, that the care of the animal. If an ox falls into a ditch, and there are things that occurred that and are just natural that require daily attention. And I don't know how they would do it now if you were an Orthodox Jew and a dairy farmer. I'm sure there are some. I did talk to a dairy farmer in Idaho a couple of years ago, and they've got it set up now. They have these machines, and the cows walk up to them, and the milker goes right up on their udder and finds it, locates it and everything, milks them, and they walk out. Let's go, and they just walk out. And as Connie said, they really need that milking. I mean, that's an absolute essential. They can't not milk them. The cows actually line up. They wait their turn to get milked. They're all ready to go through that. And of course, that means one less farmhand, I guess, or maybe more than one less farmhand. But the sheep and the cattle and the goat, they don't know it's Sabbath, and they do know they're not working that day. That's a part of it. That it's not just the people themselves, the citizens of Israel themselves, that take the Sabbath. Everybody that dwells in their midst, is to take the Sabbath. Even if you're a sojourner, you're just traveling through. I wrote a bulletin article a few weeks ago. One of my favorite episodes of Andy Griffith is when the big city salesman is going through town and his car breaks down in Mayberry, and he's trying to get a phone calls through. He's trying to do all these things, get his car fixed, everything on Sunday. And Sunday was pretty much the Sabbath in Mayberry back then. So he was having a really hard time. He did get Wally down to the fill station to work on his car, and he couldn't get those old ladies off the party line, though. They were going to talk about their ailments no matter what his schedule said. So it was it's one of those things. I mentioned this. I was teaching something. I'm not exactly sure what I was teaching, but I brought up the fact at the congregation in Issaquah that this is one of the 10 Commandments we don't really keep anymore. And I got a lot of cynicism. Like, oh, well, we keep the Sabbath. No, you don't. I mean, yes, there are some exceptions and there's some allowances for certain things, but you don't kind of keep the Sabbath.
Well, actually, we don't keep any of the 10 Commandments. We keep the laws that is given us under the New Testament.
Yes, I guess the way I've heard it said is that they go forward into the New Testament. They're incorporated maybe by reference or whatever in the New Testament, but we do not even really make any bones. I mean, we don't do these other things, do we? The other 9, they're still kind of, we're not murdering. Hopefully we're not adultering or not bearing false witness. We're not doing thieving. And we've already talked about the first 3. We try to worship only God, have no other God, worship him only, don't worship graven images, don't take the name of the Lord in vain.
But we don't not do them because of they're in the Old Testament, because we're governed by the New Testament, and those ideas are presented in the New Testament, and we obey them because they're in the New Testament, not because they're in the Old Testament, because it's done and gone away with.
And those things, a good number of those 10 Commandments really are covered with the love your neighbor as yourself. You don't.
Which is also an Old Testament law.
Well, yeah, but it's something that Jesus, whenever he said these are the things that are important, that you love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and that you love you love your brother as I have loved you.
If you want to just get rid of stuff, a lot of people get rid of the Gospels because Jesus was teaching under the Old Testament. Jesus wasn't a Christian, he was a Jew. And so what he has to say doesn't really matter because it was said under the Old Testament. Then some people will say you don't have to listen to Paul because Paul wasn't Jesus. You should listen to Jesus, not Paul. So if you listen to everybody, you don't have to listen to any of it. You just do whatever you want. And that's what most people in the world probably do, is just do whatever they want. I think we are certainly to be guided by the Mosaic Law. We are not bound by the Mosaic Law. I think we do try to keep a lot of the guiding principles and apply them in our lives, even if they're not. As we get into some of these other ones, we will talk a little bit about the application, the interpersonal things in the New Testament to some extent. And we'll see that maybe it didn't mean exactly then what we want it to mean now. And we get mad at people who kind of modernize the understanding of scriptures to some extent in some ways and don't realize maybe that we're doing that. I think keeping Sabbath is still a valuable practice if that's what you want to do. But as I said, when the group I said we don't try to keep Sabbath anymore, and they kind of, you don't. And keeping Sabbath isn't, we go out to eat on Sunday rather than have mom cook. If you're making someone else work on the day, then you're not keeping the Sabbath. You're making that person break the Sabbath. You're supposed to be making people keep the Sabbath, not making people break it. And I was a crew kid back in the day. I worked at McDonald's for a few years in high school and a couple of years in college. And one summer, I worked every single Sunday morning. I think if I recall correctly, maybe that was when we got the truck in or something. I think maybe not. Maybe they just scheduled me. And But whatever it was, I worked every single Sunday morning, but I was there at church every single Sunday night. Not really an option right now here, is it, to do that? But we got an elders and deacons meeting coming up. Maybe that'll be discussed. I don't know, but it is even that's not keeping the Sabbath. Working Sunday morning but coming Sunday night is not keeping the Sabbath. I worked that morning. Why isn't he at church? Because he's working. Well, then he's not keeping the Sabbath, is he?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but what the Sabbath is the seventh day, right? So how do you keep the Sabbath on Sunday?
Well, I think it's a day of rest. Again, I think you can, whether you want to or not, or you may not want to keep it at all. I don't know. I don't think we ever really take a full day of rest. I think at some point we do something during the day that would say we're not keeping the Sabbath. The Sabbath, resting in the term of this context, doesn't mean necessarily just taking it easy. It's actually sometimes harder to not do something, isn't it, than to just do it.
I guess kind of my point was we don't keep the Sabbath, but if you wanted to have a Sabbath rest, that's something different, correct?
Well, I think what I've known people to do is, based on their own schedule, is to set aside one day a week and say, we're going to keep Sabbath on that day. Whatever day it is, whatever works for them. That, again, a lot of people would say, well, that's not keeping the Sabbath. I guess you could say it's them keeping their Sabbath to some extent. And I know we're in a geographical context where this is kind of a big deal. I mean, there's a grocery store you can't go to on Saturday, or you can go there, but unless you break in, you're not getting in. And there's that was the case on Sunday. Not that long ago, I was in Chattanooga many years ago on a Sunday, and it opened at noon. It's kind of that's the way we kind of do things. That's the American way, And I guess what I was saying is it was this crowd was very reluctant to say they did not keep this commandment, even though there is no way in the world they were keeping this commandment. And I'm not saying we absolutely have to. We don't. We do keep, I think the other ones are all certainly integral to the basic, at least ideas of what we have of being a Christian are. These are the things, this is how we live our life. What it means and how that plays out, we'll look at that, some of those things, particularly in the interpersonal stuff, later on. We have a new covenant. There's no doubt about that. But God doesn't change, does he? Our new covenant is with the unchanging hand. Time is filled with swift transition, but hold to the unchanging hand. So I think we do need to still take some of the guidance from the Old Testament when we're told to be still and know that God is Lord. And that is something we need to do. We do need to get away from pursuing our own agenda. We should always, in a sense, be pursuing God's agenda. But in the day-to-day, how we earn our bread and how we make our way through the world, things come to the forefront. The urgent takes precedent over the important. And hi, Robin, and hi, Kim. So it is helpful and I think necessary at some point. We try to do a little bit of that when we come to worship service. We should do that, I think, if we can. And we do that certainly around the Lord's table, don't we? We try to really focus on what we're doing at that particular moment. So it is, a commandment that we really don't keep. I think we keep the rest of them. Maybe not as they're here, but, it's really, to me, it's this Old and New Testament. I think an Old and New Covenant is fine if you want to understand it that way, but an Old and New Testament I don't think is a really useful division, because I think the gospel, the whole Bible is God dealing with man's sin. God creates, puts man in the middle of perfection, man sins, and the rest of the Bible is God dealing with that, one way or another.
If I'm wrong, is the Old Testament not the schoolmaster teaching us what not to do? We are supposed to be the New Testament Christians.
Well, we're in a new covenant. It's interesting, the term that Paul uses for the Old Testament as being a schoolmaster, what we call it, is frequently translated as schoolmaster. It would actually have been probably a slave that took the children of the household, the boys mainly, from the house to the school and made sure they made it there safely.
What I'm getting at is this. I don't have no bulls and no cows to kill and
Mhm.
no blood over my door. It's what I'm getting. We cannot do what they did back then. Am I right or wrong?
We could. I think we could. We don't, but we could.
What would be the purpose of us doing?
I'm not saying we should. We do have a new covenant, new blood, new sacrifice. I'm not calling on us to keep the Passover, but I am saying we could. I mean, we may look at our current existence and say it's not practical. But a lot of things we do in faith are not practical. It's not about practicality. Keeping the Sabbath is not practical if you're in a farming community. It's very impractical. The crop's ready, go harvest it. Well, it's Sabbath. We can't. It's impractical. It would be impractical, but you could go buy a lamb and
Because he
time to
says
your.
to do what his son said to.
We are not required to at all. I am not trying to bring us back and put us under the Mosaic law. I am saying that I think it serves more than just kind of. I guess so. I don't know exactly. It depends on how you look at it. But I think of the old law as still God speaking to His people.
But why did he tell us to do what his son said to?
Well, His son kept the law.
And that's why we're called Christian.
And His son's disciples. Yeah, His son's disciples harvested grain on the Sabbath too, didn't they?
But we're not supposed to be going back there. We're supposed to do what his son said to.
Well, that was, again, the big struggle that Paul faces in his writings in the New Testament is blending Jewish culture with Gentile culture, Greco-Roman culture. And the Jews kept practicing a lot of their stuff in what we call the Old Testament. And I guess I don't really like the term Old and New Testament so much. I use it a lot because it's the term and it's how they think about it and how they know it. And I'm not that much offended by it. But the Old Testament is the Mosaic commandments are the law God established for His community of people to worship Him and to dwell together in peace. That was the intent, so that they could be in the same land together. And I think we can find a lot more guidance out of it if we look at it and consider it carefully. We do not just plug and play it into our lives. But could we keep this? I think we could. It would be difficult. It would be more difficult now than it was when Jesus was alive, because Jesus lived in a country that kept Mosaic law, and we don't. Do we have to keep the Sabbath, a Sabbath? I think we have to at times have peace and rest. I think there's a universal human need to rest, not just to get time off of work, but to be still and know that He is God. To re-examine, for everyone to examine themselves and see where they need to maybe put things right, or grow in their trust of God. So I'm not trying to put us back under the old law. I'm not trying to get us to keep the Sabbath. I'm not trying to make Sunday a Sabbath. But it is instructive, I think very instructive, to look not just at the commandment itself, but why they kept the commandment. And why they kept the commandment really should inform how we live as Christians, I think. Even if we don't keep the commandment ourselves, why did they keep it? And what does it mean? I mean, how did they keep it? Is it enough for me to take my rest at the expense of someone else not having theirs? Is that keeping the Sabbath? At the same time, we live in such an interdependent society. There's no way everybody can rest at once, is there? But this is the world that has been created by people who didn't follow the teachings of God either. And a lot of times someone will come up with a new way of governing or a new idea about how we should do things. And people will say, there's no way we can do that. No, we can't. Not now. Not because of what the world we have created. It's totally impractical now. But if we had followed that principle all along, we wouldn't be where we are right now. You know, if we did everything the founding fathers said in our country up front about staying out of other countries' businesses, where would we be right now? It's too late now, though, isn't it? It's too late. We're in it. In for a penny, in for a pound. So it's I understand where you're coming from, and I'm not advocating requiring people to keep a Sabbath, but I do think that looking at why they kept the Sabbath and what it meant to keep the Sabbath is instructive for us now. And it is clearly, I think the other 9 commandments we all try, maybe not as commandments, but they are certainly things we try to do now, aren't they? And we just don't even really try with this one. Or if we think we do, we don't. We don't understand the commandment very well. We don't understand what it really required very well.
I think it's been,
Yeah.
go ahead.
No, I thought you just got jumbled up a bit. I don't know if I can get it out of my mouth.
So again, this is one of the commandments that is the most varied between Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. Not obviously, perhaps just in some extent, Exodus 20 very much is about the religious aspect of keeping the Sabbath, remembering the Sabbath. Remembering is the religious connotation, to say the right prayers. It is a religious practice. And really, all religious practices fail the practicality test for the most part. You know, they're not there to be practical. So keeping the Sabbath is not particularly practical. Deuteronomy emphasizes keeping the Sabbath. And it kind of plays out in the background from which this commandment comes in according to the 2 texts. In Exodus, the commandment comes from creation. that the Lord created the heavens and the earth and all that's in it in 6 days. And on the seventh day, he rested. If God needs to rest, humans need to rest too, right? So this God made the Sabbath day holy. You will keep it holy. In Deuteronomy, it's much more about the human being, the just nature of humans to rest, that they need to rest. They absolutely require it. It's a right that they have. You know, we have a culture right now where so many people have jobs that they accumulate a lot of time off work, a lot of vacation time, and every year they don't use it. Maybe they cash it in, maybe they lose it. And work and employers a lot of times really count on you not using your vacation time. When you use it, they lay a guilt trip on you. We're going to be real busy then. You're basically asking your employee to leave money on the table, to kick back part of his compensation when he doesn't use all his vacation time. And sometimes that's their choice. A lot of people really love their jobs and never get around to using it. But Deuteronomy really looks at the way Egyptian slaveholders treated the Israelites and said, you're going to be different. Not you're going to get your revenge. You're going to make others suffer for what you endured. You're going to be different. You're going to treat everybody and everything different. And it includes the land. Every 6 years they planted on the land, and the seventh year they rested the land. Went fallow for a year. They gave the land a Sabbath. And then every 50th year was the year of Jubilee, a whole year of Sabbath. And all this reflects confidence in the Lord. But it's not easy. It takes a lot of devotion to do this. And you probably don't do it perfectly. And this is the first of the positive commandments. Everything else has been do not. Don't have any other gods before me. Do not have graven images. Do not take the name of the Lord in vain. Finally, he says do something. But what is doing? Not doing, right? And so we've kind of looked at the positive corollaries to these negative commandments. What's the positive corollary to not taking the Lord's name in vain? Well, the positive corollary is to bring praise, honor, and glory to the name of the Lord. What is the negative corollary to keep the Sabbath? Don't forget the Sabbath.
Well, it kind of goes back to the first ones that talk about God on the Sabbath. You're supposed to remember what God has done for you, especially like you say here in Deuteronomy where it's talking about it. You're supposed to remember what the Lord has done. You're supposed to take time out. God, knowing how we are as humans, he told them, take time out and remember me.
And it's especially important in an agricultural, where maybe they would have times of year where they weren't as busy and they rested a lot more. When the crop's in the barn, it's not time to plant yet. And this is, there's this old historical stereotype that Southerners are lazy. Well, the Northern media types would visit the South. They wait till the winter to go to get out of the Northeast winter. And they go down south. And guess what the Southern farmers had to do in the winter? Not that much. Yeah. Fix the fences, do some work here and there, some maintenance and stuff like that. But they'd go down south and they'd see all these Southerners with not a whole lot to do. The crop is already harvested. What did they do the first, those 8 months of between plant and harvest? They worked their tails off. So it's in the agricultural setting, you can get into seasons of rest and work. And instead of relying on that seasonality, you have this weekly requirement to rest. And I don't know if I answered Robin's question. Robin said that she disagrees. We are not bound by the old law. We're not bound by the old law. I'm not trying to get us to start offering sacrifices and all that. But we can take from those lessons, can't we? We can take from, especially when they're explaining why you do these things, what it means. And
I think that's an important thing that you've been talking about throughout this Old Testament study that we've been doing. There's a lot of things that we, the whys that we don't normally think of, and you can take the whys and the lessons from the Old Testament and apply them to our lives now. And I think that ties in with what Alma was saying about this being a schoolmaster, a teacher. It's teaching us how God dealt with people and how people were supposed to deal with God. And all of these lessons, had the Israelites learned from their mistakes, things would have been a whole lot different. They'd have been different in the New Testament time, and they'd be different now if more of us would learn from our mistakes. Or, we're always told to learn from other people's mistakes. Don't make this, don't make the same mistake that I did. Do this instead. And, the whole Bible is full of that information that if we just applied it, we wouldn't make the same mistakes. We wouldn't make the same mistakes over and over. But that's not how it works.
The world would look very differently, and it would probably not be nearly as efficient. But would that be such a bad thing?
Be more respectful to God and more understanding, hopefully, of each other. Once you accept God and realize God's concern for mankind that He created, then to me, I've never yet been able to divorce or take away the Old Testament or the covenant or the history that we learn about God and what He expected His people to do. And when I see a New Testament only, and of course you can find that, I look at that and say, that's only half the story. You're not getting the rest of the information you need. If all you do is read the New Testament, you get about Christ, you get about things that you have to know about. But I think, as you're stating here, there's a lot of have to know in the other part.
I think God reveals Himself one way in the Old Testament that He doesn't reveal Himself in the New Testament. In the New Testament, He reveals Himself through Christ. This is God. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Again, some people say, well, Jesus, everything He taught was the Jews under the old law.
I mean, it's pretty short. When you look at Genesis and you look at man and what the fall and so forth, that's actually a pretty short story, but it's the most important part of the story in the sense of why are we where we at today? The man wasn't able to live in the garden. Only God wanted.
Well, the first sin was eating the wrong fruit. The second sin was murder.
It was murder.
We go,
Yeah.
it accelerates. So that escalated very quickly, you could say. So,
Don't forget the lying in between.
well, that was covering up the first sin. So, but it goes very quickly, doesn't it? And so these, these commandments, I think, we do. I mean, would you say that we're not to keep any of these things, that these are not relevant to our lives? I think most of us would say we need to be like this, don't we? These are things that need to be in our life, but we don't keep Sabbath. And I don't think we have to keep it in the way the Jewish people kept it, but the values behind it are very important. And, I grew up in a culture and a time in a place where labor unions were despised, really, even by blue collar workers. You know, the guys, the old roughnecks out at the refineries and all that stuff. What, I don't know if roughnecks work at refineries or not, but they wanted the job. And in the South, you feel like we could get jobs here if we don't have unions. If we bring in the unions, they'll just keep the jobs up north. So we don't want unions down here. But when you look at how labor unions came to be, they didn't come to be because the employers were treating the employees fairly and honestly, right? It came because these little pharaohs wanted everything from their workers to build their own empire. If you've ever been to Victoria, you can go to Craigdarroch Castle, I think is the name of it, and it was built by a coal mining magnate up there in Victoria, and it is beautiful. You couldn't build it now because he took woods from different parts of the world that you're not allowed to export or import anymore. They're so rare, and there's no telling what it would have cost. I don't remember what it cost him at the time, and I have no idea. Again, you probably couldn't even do it now. So it would be an astronomical sum to try to recreate that building now. And, they're hanging up for full disclosure purposes, I guess they have hanging up in one of the walls a scathing editorial piece from the local newspaper talking about this mansion the guy's building, while his own workers who are digging that coal can't afford to buy coal to keep their houses warm in the winter. And that is not a biblical principle. That is not a godly principle. And if the big barons and all that back in the day when the Industrial Revolution was occurring had treated their workers fairly and honestly all along, they might not have to be dealing with these unions right now. And yes, some of the unions are totally corrupt. They're run by the mafia or whatever. They were, certainly. I mean, Jimmy Hoffa, I don't think he's ever going to show up, so I guess I can say it. The guy was a crook, let's face it. But the Teamsters loved him, and the Teamsters were mostly a bunch of truck drivers and everything, and they were trying to make a good wage. So if the people who hired the truck drivers had treated them fair, if they gave them a good wage to begin with, there would be much less incentive. And that's what happens in the South. It might not be considered a good wage by other people, but the Southerners are happy to usually have that job and have that paycheck. And the last thing they want is some Yankees coming down here, bringing labor union with them and messing up what we've got. But there's also a lot of Southerners, and I've met them out here, who left the South because the wages weren't good and came out to the Pacific Northwest to get work because they could make a lot more money doing the same job here than they could back in Arkansas or Texas or North Carolina or wherever, Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama. I don't know where it all came from. So just real quickly, we're definitely going to move on. These first 4 commandments, as we have counted them, are about humans' relationship to God, how we relate to God. We have no other gods. We do not take his name in vain. We do not worship graven images. And we remember what he has done and how he has made us. Both creation and the resistance to the actions of the slaveholders in Egypt both go to how God made humans. He made them in his image, and God rested. So God's people will rest. Humans need to rest. So coming out of that, we go into the next commandment. It's another positive commandment, the only other positive commandment. And it is, you shall honor your father and your mother. The first 4 commandments, how do you relate to God? The last 6, again, if you want to make them 10, the last 6 commandments are how do you relate to one another? And that starts out with, how do you relate to your parents? And we'll look at that, and the world has changed a lot since then too. And this is not always easy, not for everybody. I mean, I have very honorable parents. It's easy for me to honor mine. Some people don't have honorable parents. And we're getting into the second, third, and fourth generation, I think, in our country where parents are not raising their kids. I don't want to sound too much like the old man I am quickly becoming. But I have a wife who's in education. And when she tells me what the kids say to her, she's been threatened with violence to her own person. I mean, if I did something like that and the teacher told my parents, you never would have met me. You want to threaten the teacher. They wouldn't have threatened either. There would not have been a threat. It just would have been death. That would have been slow, painful, but that's not how, but that's not what's going on now. It's the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of people who were not raised by adults anyway, by caring, loving adults. And I've always been a big believer in the public school system because I came up through it and I didn't like it all the time. But I thought, the education is there. It seemed to work pretty well, probably as well as any other setting you could come up with. But, it's like our whole society. If we're not going to be responsible citizens, then it's going to fall apart. It will absolutely collapse. We'll have as much freedom as we are responsible with. And if we're not responsible with it as a people, then we'll lose it all. I don't know if we'll end up speaking Chinese or Russian in 10 years, but it looks like it's going to be one or the other. But, we have got to be responsible if we want to be free. And if you want to keep the institutions that you grew up with alive, people have to honor them and participate in them. I hope Robin is not still too angry with me, but anyway, let's close this with the prayer, and we'll get into the fifth commandment next week.